There is a particular kind of exhaustion that no one talks about honestly. It is not the exhaustion of overwork or sleeplessness, though you may have those too. It is the exhaustion of being in rooms where no one seems to be thinking, of conversations that circle the same shallow pool endlessly, of watching decisions get made by people who have not considered the deeper implications of anything. You come home from these encounters depleted in a way that is hard to explain. Not tired in your body, but tired somewhere closer to your core, as if the very act of translating yourself into terms others can follow has cost you something you cannot easily replenish. You have probably tried to explain this to someone and watched their face go politely blank. You have probably told yourself to stop being arrogant, to lower your expectations, to find the good in everyone, and sometimes you succeed, but the depletion keeps returning, the gap keeps widening. And underneath the frustration, there is something more troubling, the quiet, persistent suspicion that you are doing something wrong, that there is something about you that cannot connect, and that this failure, if it is a failure, is yours alone to carry. What I want to explore with you today is not how to tolerate people you consider less intelligent than yourself. That framing, though it may feel accurate in your most honest moments, is already leading you in the wrong direction. What I want to explore is something more fundamental and considerably more strange. It is the question of what intelligence actually is, what it is for, and why the ways most intelligent people have been taught to use their minds almost guarantee the kind of suffering that brought you here. Because the real problem is not that you are surrounded by people who think less deeply than you. The real problem is something about what you have been doing with the depth you possess, and why that depth, which should be a source of richness, has increasingly become a source of isolation. This requires us to start somewhere that might feel uncomfortable. We need to start with the possibility that what you call intelligence, what you experience as seeing more clearly than others, might not be functioning the way you think it is. Hannah Arendt, who spent much of her life thinking in rooms where most people could not follow her, and who understood better than almost anyone what it meant to be genuinely outside the consensus of thought around her, made a distinction that most people miss entirely when they talk about the life of the mind. She distinguished between thinking and cognition. Cognition is the capacity to solve problems, to process information efficiently, to arrive at correct answers. It is measurable. It is useful. It produces things. Thinking, by contrast, is something quite different. Thinking, for Arendt, is the inner dialogue the self conducts with itself. It is not goal-oriented. It does not necessarily produce results. It questions what cognition takes for granted. And here is the crucial part. It makes the thinker uncertain in ways that mere cognizers never experience, because thinking, real thinking, dissolves the solid ground beneath your feet. It reveals that what you thought you knew was more complicated than you imagined. It introduces you to the fact that the questions that matter most do not have clean answers. What most people call being intelligent is mostly advanced cognition, the ability to process faster, to see patterns sooner, to draw connections that others miss. These are genuine gifts, but they are not the same as thinking in Arendt's sense, and confusing them leads to a very specific kind of suffering, the suffering you are likely experiencing right now. Because when you are a powerful cognizer who has not yet encountered genuine thinking, you develop a relationship to your own mind that is quietly catastrophic. You begin to identify with your speed, with your accuracy, with being right. You begin to organize your sense of self around the distance between how clearly you see and how cloudily others seem to see. And when that distance is large, which for genuinely intelligent people it often is, you experience other people not as fellow humans navigating a shared difficulty, but as obstacles, as sources of friction, as evidence of a universe that is somehow failing to arrange itself properly. I want to ask you something, and I want you to sit with it rather than answer it immediately. How much of your frustration with the people around you is actually frustration with the fact that you cannot control the pace at which the world thinks? Because that is, when you examine it carefully, what the frustration of intelligence in mediocre company so often comes down to. Not the suffering of a superior mind imprisoned by inferior ones, though it can feel exactly like that, but the suffering of a mind that has organized itself around speed and accuracy and correctness, encountering a world that moves at its own pace, on its own terms, indifferent to the preferences of anyone. If you have been nodding along with this, and I suspect many of you have been, let me ask you something. How long have you been carrying this particular loneliness? The loneliness of feeling like you are perpetually waiting for others to catch up. You do not have to answer out loud if you are not ready, but I want you to know that what you are experiencing is far more common among genuinely thoughtful people than anyone admits. If you are willing to share, drop a comment below. Tell me when you first noticed this gap, this particular kind of being different. If words feel difficult right now, just write this: I know this feeling, that is enough. Because someone else watching this needs to see that they are not alone in it. Your willingness to name it creates permission for someone else to stop hiding theirs. Now let us go deeper, because the surface answer here, the answer you have probably already considered, is that you need to be more patient, more compassionate, more willing to meet people where they are. This is true, and it is also insufficient, and it misses the real transformation available to you. Real transformation requires understanding not just how to behave differently around people who think differently, but why your current relationship to your own intelligence is costing you so much, and what it would mean to relate to it differently. Arendt wrote about what she called the banality of evil, which was her account of how ordinary people participate in terrible things, not through malice, but through the simple failure to think, the refusal to examine what one is doing, to question the orders one follows, to hold one's actions up to any moral scrutiny. What she meant was that the absence of thinking, real thinking, the inner dialogue that questions and complicates, is far more dangerous than stupidity. But there is another banality she gestured at less explicitly, one that is just as relevant to our conversation today. We might call it the banality of frustration. The unexamined pattern in which intelligent people, having defined themselves by their capacity to see clearly, spend enormous amounts of their inner life resenting everyone who sees less clearly. Not through malice either, through a failure of a different kind of examination. Because here is what the frustrated intelligent person almost never stops to ask. What is my seeing actually for? What does the capacity to perceive complexity, to notice what others miss, to think several moves ahead, what is that capacity in service of? If your answer, when you examine it honestly, is something like, it is what makes me me, it is what I am proud of, it is what I have built my sense of worth around, then you have discovered the source of your exhaustion. You are not using your intelligence to understand the world. You are using the world to confirm your intelligence, and when the world refuses to cooperate with that project, as it reliably does, you suffer. This is a subtle and important distinction. A person using their mind to genuinely understand encounters other people, even people who think quite differently, as information, as perspectives that complicate the picture, as human beings navigating existence with their own partial maps and their own genuine confusions. A person using the world to confirm their intelligence encounters other people as tests that they either pass or fail. And most people, by this standard, fail. Not because they are actually failing at anything real, but because they are not performing the role of intellectual validation that the frustrated mind has assigned them. Consider what actually happens in most interactions between a very intelligent person and someone they experience as significantly less intelligent. The intelligent person, running on this unexamined pattern, enters the conversation already slightly braced, already aware of the gap, already anticipating the moment when the other person will say something that confirms what the intelligent person already believes about them. And of course, that moment arrives. Because when you are looking for something, you find it. And when you find it, you catalog it. And when you have catalogued enough examples, you have built a case so airtight that no amount of evidence to the contrary could dismantle it. This is not insight. This is confirmation bias dressed in the clothes of superior perception. I want to suggest something that may be difficult to hear, not because it is an accusation, but because it is a pattern so common among thoughtful people that recognizing it is almost a prerequisite for actually becoming as wise as you already believe yourself to be. The experience of being surrounded by mediocrity is, in most cases, a partly constructed experience. Not entirely. There are real differences in how deeply people think, how carefully they reason, how willing they are to question their own assumptions. These differences are real, but the experience of being surrounded by it, of being perpetually in rooms where no one meets you, of being fundamentally alone in your perception, that experience is at least partly a product of a way of looking that is itself unexamined. Let me offer you a thought experiment. Think of the last person you experienced as significantly less intelligent or thoughtful than yourself. Hold them in mind. Now ask yourself, what do you actually know about their inner life? What do you know about what they question in the privacy of their own thoughts? What do you know about the complexity they navigate in areas you have no access to? What do you know about what they have suffered, what they have lost, what they have had to rebuild? You probably know very little. What you know is how they performed in the domains you were paying attention to, and you have extrapolated from that performance to a global judgment about their depth and worth as a human being. This is not intelligence. This is the very same cognitive error you are most likely to criticize in others. Hannah Arendt had a concept she called plurality. She meant by it that the human world is constituted by the irreducible difference between persons, that no two human beings see the world from the same position, and that this irreducible difference is not a problem to be solved, but the very condition of the possibility of genuine encounter. When we encounter another person who sees differently than we do, we are not encountering a malfunction. We are encountering the basic structure of human reality, and what we do with that encounter, whether we close around our own perspective or stay genuinely open to what the other person's different seeing might reveal, is one of the most fundamental choices available to a thinking being. Most intelligent people, when they first hear this, feel a kind of instinctive resistance. It sounds like you are being asked to pretend that all perspectives are equally valid, that someone who reasons sloppily is just as worth listening to as someone who reasons carefully, that there is no such thing as actually thinking better or worse. That is not what I'm saying. There are better and worse ways of reasoning. There are more and less careful ways of examining evidence. There are people who question their assumptions and people who never do. These differences are real and they matter. But acknowledging the reality of these differences is entirely compatible with recognizing that your experience of other people as mediocre might be telling you something not primarily about them, but about a pattern in yourself that is worth examining. If this perspective is offering you something, consider subscribing. I come back to these questions every week, and there is much more to explore together. Because here is what changes when you actually make this turn. When you shift from using the world to confirm your intelligence to using your intelligence to understand the world. Other people become genuinely interesting, not as performers in your ongoing evaluation of who meets the standard, but as puzzles, as windows into ways of being human that are genuinely different from your own. The person who seems not to think very deeply about ideas might be doing something with their hands or with their relationships or with their bodies or with their emotional lives that is as sophisticated and intricate as anything you are doing with your mind. You have just not been in the habit of looking for that. You have been looking for what you already recognize as intelligence and finding it in the form you already know. This is not sentimentality. It is not the self-help injunction to find the good in everyone. It is something more demanding and more interesting. It is the intellectual humility that genuine thinking, in Arendt's sense, actually requires. Because the moment you believe you have understood something completely, that you have categorized it accurately, and need only file it away, you have stopped thinking about it. Thinking requires staying with the question. It requires letting the thing you are examining remain more complex than your current understanding of it, and that includes other people. Now, there is another dimension of this that we need to address, because the frustration you feel is not always about misperception. Sometimes you are in fact in a situation where the level of thinking around you is genuinely limiting, where the decisions being made are genuinely less considered than they should be, where the conversations genuinely do not go anywhere worth going. These situations are real, and the question of how to navigate them, how to function with integrity in environments that do not reward depth, is a genuine and important question that deserves a genuine answer. Arendt spent much of her career thinking about how to act in the public world while preserving the integrity of one's inner life. She understood that the public realm, The realm of work and politics and institutions operates according to its own logic, a logic that often has little room for the kind of sustained thinking she valued. And her answer was not to withdraw from that realm. It was not to find a private garden where only other deep thinkers were permitted. It was to act in the world as it actually is, while maintaining the thinking life in parallel, and to recognize that these two activities, action in the world and the thinking that examines that action, feed each other in ways that neither can achieve alone. What does this mean practically? It means something like this. In the meeting where the decision is being made badly, you do not have only two options, the option of watching in contempt and the option of pretending everything is fine. There is a third option, and it is considerably harder than either of those. It is the option of trying to introduce a question, a genuine question, one that opens the conversation rather than closes it, that invites the people around you to think more carefully, without positioning you as the one who has already finished thinking and is now waiting for them to catch up. This requires giving up the comfortable superiority of contempt in exchange for the more demanding and more vulnerable act of genuine engagement. It requires accepting that your question might not land, that people might not take it up, that you might have to ask it differently the next time and differently again after that. This is not a comfortable position, but comfort, as Arendt would insist, is not what the life of the mind is for. Genuine thinking is inherently uncomfortable. It means remaining uncertain about things you would prefer to be certain about. It means staying in the question when your mind wants the relief of the answer. And it means, perhaps most importantly, applying that same willingness to remain uncertain to your judgments about other people. There is something else worth examining here, which is the role that intelligence plays in loneliness. Because among the people who are drawn to this kind of inquiry, loneliness is almost universal. The feeling of not quite fitting, of conversations that do not go where you want them to go, of a hunger for a certain quality of exchange that is rarely satisfied. This loneliness is real, and it is easy, entirely too easy, to attribute it entirely to the gap between your depth and the shallowness of those around you. But I want to suggest that this attribution, while it contains some truth, also contains a significant distortion. Consider that the depth you are seeking in others is a depth that exists inside you. The conversations you are hungry for are conversations that, at their core, are about the questions you are already asking yourself in private. And when you go into an interaction already certain that the person you are about to speak with cannot meet you at the level where those questions live, you have foreclosed the possibility of genuine encounter before it begins. Not always, not entirely, but more often than you realize, because people tend to meet the quality of attention they are offered. When you bring your full curiosity to an interaction, when you are genuinely interested in what the other person actually thinks, rather than in confirming that they think less than you, the conversation that emerges is often surprisingly different from what you expected. I know this is not always true. There are conversations that really do go nowhere regardless of what you bring to them. There are people who are so defended, so committed to the surface, that genuine contact is simply not available. I am not asking you to pretend otherwise, but I am asking you to honestly examine what percentage of your encounters fall into that category when you are genuinely bringing your full, curious, non-superior presence to them, versus what percentage fall into that category when you arrive already slightly withdrawn, already slightly contemptuous, already scanning for the proof of what you already believe. If what I am exploring here is touching something real in you, something you have been sitting with for a long time, without quite being able to articulate it, I want to invite you to be part of this ongoing conversation. There are many people engaging with these questions here, people who are done with easy answers and ready to actually look at what is driving their experience. Consider subscribing, not for notifications, but for companionship on a path that can feel very solitary. And share in the comments what landed for you today. Your reflection might be exactly what someone else needs to read to feel less alone in their own version of this struggle. I read every comment, and the responses I receive regularly change how I think about these questions. What you bring matters here. Let me return to something Arendt wrote about what she called natality, the capacity for new beginnings. She meant something very specific by this, something that runs directly against the way most intelligent, frustrated people understand their situation. Natality is the fact that every human being who enters the world brings with them the possibility of something genuinely new. Not just different, not just a novel combination of existing elements, but a genuinely unpredictable beginning. And this capacity for beginning, she argued, is not the exclusive property of great minds. It belongs to every human being simply by virtue of the fact of their existence, the fact that they were born, that they arrived into the world as something that had never been there before. What this means for our question is this: the person you are dismissing as mediocre carries within them, by the very fact of their existence, a capacity for beginning that you cannot predict, and that may, if you remain open to it, surprise you in ways that your current certainty about them cannot accommodate. This is not a pious wish, it is a structural fact about human beings, and taking it seriously requires something that intelligence, in the narrow sense, does not automatically provide. It requires the willingness to be wrong about people, to have misjudged them, to discover that the category you placed them in was too small. Think about a time when you were wrong about someone in this way, when someone you had written off revealed a depth or a capability or a quality of understanding that caught you genuinely off guard. Most people, if they are honest, have at least a few of these memories, and what is interesting about them is that they tend to be among the most vivid and the most meaningful encounters we can recall. The surprise of being wrong about a person in this direction, of discovering more than you expected, has a quality of richness that the confirmation of your low expectations simply cannot match. And the person who is perpetually being confirmed in their low expectations, who moves through the world finding mediocrity everywhere they look, is systematically cutting themselves off from this particular kind of richness. They are choosing the cold comfort of being right over the warm discomfort of being surprised. There is a passage in Arendt where she talks about the life of the mind as a withdrawal from the world, a turning inward, a conversation with oneself that requires temporarily leaving the shared world behind. And she is clear that this withdrawal is necessary. That genuine thinking cannot happen in the noise of constant engagement, that there is a solitude proper to the thinking life that is not loneliness, but a precondition of real thought. But she is equally clear that this withdrawal is only half of the movement. The other half is the return. The thinker who never returns from their private dialogue with themselves, who never brings what they have discovered back into contact with the shared world of other people, has not completed the movement. They have stopped at the comfortable point and refused the harder part. And this is, I think, what is happening for many of the people who find themselves perpetually frustrated in the company of those they experience as less thoughtful. They have learned to do the first movement beautifully. They have cultivated the inner life. They have developed the capacity to think carefully and see deeply. But they have not learned how to return, how to bring what they have seen back into contact with the messy, slow, frustrating, resistant world of other people, and how to do so without abandoning either the depth they have worked so hard to develop or the other people they are attempting to engage with. This return is the hardest part. It requires something that all the intelligence in the world does not automatically confer. It requires patience that is not condescension. It requires the ability to communicate complexity without making the other person feel small. It requires meeting people where they actually are, rather than where you wish they were, and doing so not through a reduction of your own depth, but through a translation of it, an act of genuine interpretation in which you attempt to render what you have seen in terms that can be shared. This is the work of a teacher, and not in the dismissive sense that the word sometimes carries for people who would rather think alone than communicate their thinking. The work of a genuine teacher, in the Socratic sense, is not to deposit understanding into passive recipients. It is to ask questions that help other people discover what they already, in some inchoate form, already know. It is to create the conditions in which thinking becomes possible for someone who has not yet discovered it as a possibility in themselves. And here is something interesting. The people who have made the greatest contributions to human understanding, the people whose thinking has most genuinely enlarged what it means to be human, have almost without exception been deeply engaged with the question of how to communicate across the gap between deep and shallow understanding. They have not been content to remain in their own depth. They have accepted the frustrating, imperfect, perpetually incomplete task of trying to bring others into contact with what they had seen. And in doing so, they have almost always found that the act of attempting to communicate sharpened their own thinking in ways that private contemplation alone never could. Because the questions that other people ask, the places where they get confused, the connections they draw that you had not expected, these things force you to examine your own understanding from angles you had not considered. The person you thought had nothing to offer you turns out to have offered you the exact friction you needed to make your thinking more honest. This does not mean that every conversation with every person is going to be a revelation. It does not mean that you should expect to find profound wisdom everywhere you look. It means that the posture of perpetual frustration, of moving through the world already half turned away from the people in it, is costing you something. And what it is costing you is not just peace of mind, though it is costing you that. What it is costing you is the possibility of genuine thought. Because genuine thought, in Arendt's sense, is always conducted in at least implicit dialogue with others. Even when we think alone, we are thinking in a tradition, in a language, in a web of concepts and questions that other human beings have given us. We are never purely alone in our thinking, and the person who pretends to be, who imagines that their private understanding is entirely self-generated and would only be contaminated by genuine contact with other minds, has misunderstood something fundamental about the nature of the thinking they prize so highly. Let me try to draw this together in a way that is actually useful, because I am aware that I have been complicating the picture considerably, and the question you came here with, how do intelligent people deal with people they experience as mediocre, deserves an answer that can be carried back into your actual life. The first thing that changes when you genuinely internalize what I have been describing is the way you enter situations. Instead of arriving already calibrated to the probable intellectual level of the room, you arrive with a genuine question, something you actually want to understand, and you allow the conversation to unfold around that question rather than around your assessment of who in the room is capable of contributing to it. This is not naive. You will still notice who engages with depth and who does not, but the noticing becomes information rather than verdict. It tells you something about this particular person, in this particular moment around this particular question. It does not tell you the final truth about who they are. The second thing that changes is your relationship to your own frustration. When you feel the depletion of being in a room where no one seems to be thinking, instead of reading that feeling as evidence about the people in the room, you begin to read it as information about yourself. Something is being activated in you. Some need is not being met. Some pattern is running. And that pattern is worth examining, not as a way of excusing the people around you, but as a way of understanding yourself more honestly, which is, after all, what the thinking life is supposed to be for. The third thing that changes is the quality of your relationships with the people who do meet you. When you are no longer spending your energy in the exhausting project of cataloging who falls short, you have more genuine attention available for the relationships that actually nourish you. You stop tolerating the thin soup of intellectual superiority and start actually feeding the hunger for genuine contact that was underneath the frustration all along. These are not always the people you would have predicted. They are not always the people with the most impressive credentials or the fastest processing speeds. They are the people who are willing to actually think in your presence, who will follow a question wherever it goes, who will tell you honestly when they think you are wrong. These people are rarer than you would like, but they exist. And you find them not by holding yourself apart from everyone else until only the worthy few remain, but by bringing your genuine attention to the people actually around you and allowing yourself to be surprised. There is one more thing I want to say, and it may be the most important thing of all. The gap you feel between yourself and others, the loneliness of the depth you carry, this is real. I am not asking you to pretend it away. What I'm asking you to consider is whether the size of that gap has been partly maintained by the very posture you have adopted in response to it. Because isolation and the habit of frustration reinforce each other. The more you withdraw into the confirmation of your difference, the larger the gap appears, and the larger it appears, the more justified the withdrawal seems. This is not a vicious circle you are trapped in. It is a pattern you can interrupt, not by pretending the gap is not real, but by questioning whether the gap is as fixed as it appears, by staying curious about people long enough to discover what they actually contain, by applying to your judgments about others the same rigor you bring to other questions, by refusing to let your intelligence become, of all the painful ironies, the very thing that cuts you off from the world it was supposed to help you understand. Hannah Arendt lived her whole life in the uncomfortable territory between thinking and acting, between the depth of the private mind and the messiness of the public world. She was not always successful in bridging that gap. She made judgments about people that were sometimes too harsh, too final, too certain. But she kept examining those judgments. She kept returning to the question of whether she had seen correctly. And it is that return, that refusal to let any understanding be the last understanding, that makes her work still live, still argue with us, still refuse to resolve into simple answers. That is what genuine intelligence looks like when it is actually functioning, not as a separator between the worthy and the unworthy, but as a continuous practice of seeing more clearly, which always means seeing more humbly, which always means remaining open to what the person in front of you, even the person you are most tempted to dismiss, might yet reveal. You came here, I suspect, looking for permission to trust what you see, for confirmation that yes, the frustration is justified, the gap is real. The loneliness of depth in a shallow world is a true account of your situation, and I have not given you that, quite. But what I have tried to give you is something that might, over time, be more useful. Not the comfort of being confirmed in your frustration, but the possibility of actually moving through it. Not a way to tolerate mediocrity, but a way to stop needing the idea of mediocrity to know who you are. Because when your identity is no longer organized around the distance between how you see and how others fail to see, something interesting happens. The world gets larger, the people in it get more interesting, and the depth you have worked so hard to develop becomes at last what it was always supposed to be, not a wall, a window,